in this lockdown between these two islands. And obviously reminding us that travel, virtual or real, is so important. Let me reintroduce our panelists. And let me start with Ray Mcmurray, originally from Belfast. He has worked for 16 years, putting his own creative spin on brands, marketing, and advertising in Japan's creative industry. His personal work explores authenticity, differentiation, and Ireland's expression in the marketplace. And he does join us tonight from Japan. Another co-creator, Jessop Petroski. As you may have guessed from the film, he is a travel industry professional who refused to be thwarted by the pandemic. And in seeking ways to bring authentic experiences to fellow grounded travelers, he partnered with Alistair McBroom, who you met in the film, Akira Miyanaga, and tonight's fellow panelist, Ray, in April to plot a course of action for this online experience between Japan and Ireland. You can catch his podcast, Where Did Travel Go, on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And we're very honored to have with us as moderator tonight, Paul Murray. Paul is a retired Irish diplomat, but continues his avocation as an author. He is the author of biographies of Lafcadio Hearn and Bram Stoker, and edited the Japanese ghost stories of Lafcadio Hearn. As mentioned, a posting to the Irish Embassy in Tokyo in the late 1970s ignited his ongoing interest in the East. His posting and continued interest in Japan also earned him recognition with the awarded Gold Medal of the Ireland-Japan Association in 1999 for his contribution to Ireland-Japan relations. He also served as Ireland's ambassador to South and North Korea. He joins us tonight from Ireland. So Paul, I will hand it over to you for a conversation with our filmmakers about this incredible bit of filming that we've just seen.
Thank you very much, Kate, and also to Solas for getting me involved in this very exciting project. I'm very flattered to be involved and delighted to have a chance to chat to Raymond and Jessop, obviously two very creative and also passionate co-creators of this project. Now, I think we should talk about the film first of all. And as far as I'm concerned, it falls into three main parts. Firstly, the introduction, how it came to be made as a result of COVID-19. Then the central section, dominated by Yoko Watanabe, who explains Irish folklore from a Japanese perspective. And then Akira Miyanaga's film Run. So I propose to examine each in turn, and then if we've time, to look at our experiences in Japan. Now, what I'll do is I'll probably ask either Raymond or Jessop to address a particular question, but that's just to kick things off. So both of you should feel free to comment on any of the questions. And indeed, I would be delighted if you were to do so. So we'll start off with the first part of the film, what I'm calling the introduction. And I'd say we know how the film came about. I mean, that's been made very clear. But it seems to me that the collaboration, the creative process, seems to have a certain seamless magic about it. So Raymond, I wonder, do you feel this way about it? And if so, why?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for the kind words and the lovely introduction, and obviously to Solas for putting this together. It's great. And to obviously meet everybody for the first time, Paul and Kate, and all the team behind the scenes. I do feel on watching it again that it is more seamless than what I felt it was whenever we had just pulled it out of the oven, sort of thing. Yeah, I like how it goes through a story of introducing the players, how it came about, and then of course how it goes into Yoko's introduction and her kind of very integral position in the entire production overall, in fact, and then moving into Akira's own video. It was done very, very quickly because of the nature in which Corona was affecting everybody's jobs here. And obviously Jessop can detail that experience for him, how he was put in the position he was in, and how he wanted to produce something that was going to move the dial, as they say, move the needle in terms of his work at the time, and that's how he got me in. But Yoko's involvement, I thought, was excellent because, well, I knew her already, and she was like a very deep well of information on Irish culture. And in the end, it sort of became her blossoming as opposed to a very structured pilot idea that we had come up with for multiple different travel journals, diaries, which was the overall idea. So it came together fairly well in a very short space of time. And I think it expressed a lot of what, certainly what I went in with. I wanted to give a certain view of Ireland to Japanese, as well as anybody who watched the video, that I just never see. As an Irish person, I never see this. And so rather than contribute to something that was just going to produce more kind of, oh, look at the scenery, isn't that lovely? I was like, no, I'm going to produce, or I'm going to contribute something that says a lot about some of the things that really don't have a voice at the minute. So for all of that, I think, yeah, I think it's done a fairly good job. Jessop, what do you think? Yeah. Or maybe you want to, sorry, you want to go on to another question there, sorry, but.
No, I was just going to say that as somebody who represented Ireland as a diplomat for 40 years, it also gave me a sense of looking at Ireland afresh as well, and getting a sense both of the specificity on one hand, and also the way in which Ireland fits into a global cultural network on the other. Jessop, I mean, please feel free to answer that question yourself as well. But also, I was going to ask you, were there personal meanings or resonances in the film that struck you that you'd like to articulate?
Well, yeah, I think Ray kind of summed it up pretty good there. Going into this, I was really coming into it from the travel perspective, and I was okay with just showing beautiful scenery, but Ray was adamant that we didn't just do that. And so throughout I think it was 5 weeks that we produced it. The intention was to educate and culture, give Akira the culture in order to produce Run. To be honest, everyone involved with the project got a really deep cultural understanding of Ireland through the process of producing it. As Ray had mentioned, Yoko had come in. I had not even known that she was coming in. It was kind of a last minute thing that Ray was able to work out. But when I first heard her voice, even though I didn't understand all of the Japanese she was speaking, I knew there was something very meaningful that she was telling. And so then when we did all the subtitling and I got to understand more of it, and yeah, of course, when I started seeing the footage come together with Yoko's story, and then when we layered on the music at the end, which was also, I think, days before we launched it, it was pretty emotional, to be honest with you, to see how I think in the end 15, 16 people got involved from all corners of the globe remotely. Most of us had never even met each other before. To produce something like that was pretty powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you mentioned emotion there, and I think that emotion conveys itself as well to those of us who weren't involved in making the film, who've just viewed it. You also mentioned the fact that it came together in 5 weeks. I mean, that's quite extraordinary for something, that complex and involving so many different people and moving parts, if you like. Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about the making of the film. If not, we could move on to the central section, the folklore, which I think is really at the heart of this wonderful film. Sure. So, Raymond, I see you have said that, quote, "When we tap into our founding stories, cultures, and experiences, our audiences are free to be their natural best." Now, that seems to bring us to the heart of the project. And specifically Irish folklore from a Japanese perspective. You also say that this inheritance from the past anchors our character. So would you like to comment on this, especially what Yoko Watanabe had to say? A lot of big questions there, but would you like to start?
Yeah. How much time do we have here? Well, the anchoring of who we are and all of the traditions that are in our background tell us who we are. And it was interesting when I was watching the video again. I haven't watched it since probably July or shortly after when we put it out. And it was interesting, the little fable, the little parable almost that Yoko gave us regarding the taxi driver, or sorry, it wasn't necessarily a taxi, but it was the driver of the bus, I think. And he looked out the window and he was wondering, and obviously it reached down into some place in his soul, and he just couldn't think of what to say really for something so complex. And he just said it, oh, it must be the countryside and it must be what we have here. And when I first heard that, I was like, yeah, that's definitely a very strong and a common answer. But after listening to it again this time, I felt that, and with the video and with Yoko's previous statement of that livelihoods, generations of people have lived on the countryside, you only need to look at the countryside and realize that that's the case, and that we can just look out to these rolling landscapes and cliffs, and that's why the scenery is so important for people, and is often used for the promotion of Ireland, because it just really tells a lot of the story, or at least lets us wonder about that story. I don't think it does the full telling of the story, and that's what I think it needs to be done by let's say promotion agencies anyway, or the tales, the history of our own landscapes and our own areas, and that's often done in other cultures through the language. And we've had a very precarious relationship with our native language, and so those aspects were really strong for me to give this creative production, to say something different about, do we really know ourselves, if by and large most of the day passes in the English language. The English language is not ours to control. Our own language is, and I believe in the language being, as you likely know, as you of course know, is 2,500 years on the island. If that's a more thorough representation of ourselves, I think that's obvious that that's the case. And so those are the things that I kind of hark toward. Those are the things that I discovered myself when I was in Japan, about how little I knew of myself when trying to explain who I was to people in Japan. In Japan they say the Jiko Shogai, which is the self-introduction, is a major part of society here. And the more and more I was in those conversations, the more and more I was like, actually, I have no clue about things that everybody else in other countries know offhand, like clockwork. And so in terms of, I suppose, the latter part of your question with regards to what it means to Japanese, it's hard to say, because all I ever hear back from what Japanese think of Ireland is are the not all I hear. I mean, it sounds like a complete rant that I'm going on, but I think a lot of what Ireland puts out, especially to Japan, is primarily on a kind of very commercial basis. Now, that's also reflective of the very marketing reliant relationship, perhaps, and also very consumer society that exists in Japan. But they will latch onto a cultural asset, let's say, or a cultural artifact within a product or a service or a brand, and they'll hone in on that and just lock on that. And you can write that in, you can hardwire that into their kind of collective understanding of an identity or a nation. So rather than merely being a London Porter stout, or you know, figments of some, you know, like pots of gold and stuff like this. You know, I'd rather position a certain depth, give a certain depth to a culture that is also very deep and very long in history as well. So they appreciate like for like, you know. So those are the kind of things that I aim at in my, as much as I can. It's a lot of it is kind of my own voice, my own perception, and I'm lucky to have developed some visual skills and worked in communications, and I kind of know some of the tactics and the strategies and how to make a message resonate and get bigger. So I suppose that's a kind of roundabout way to go through some of the commentary that you've picked up on how I lead my life, and then how that connects into this project, and then obviously relates back to the Japanese too.
Well, thanks very much, Raymond. I mean, you've raised a very kind of rich tapestry of issues there, so which resonate very much with me, because these are issues that I was addressing as a young diplomat in Japan, 40 plus years ago. And this whole issue as to whether you project a hard-edged kind of commercial economic aspect, or whether you project a cultural aspect, the idea being that will make you more distinctive and ultimately perhaps be more productive from a commercial point of view. There are many aspects to this culture, as you say, there's landscape, folklore, all kinds of things. One of the things that I used to use as a diplomat was early Irish art. That is specifically the pre-Christian art. And I remember when I was going to Japan, I went through San Francisco. There was a major Irish art exhibition on there at the time. I got a set of the slides. I brought them to Japan with me, and I used to give talks on early Irish art. There's also, of course, literature. There are so many aspects to this. But maybe I'll turn to Jessop now. I think perhaps as somebody born in Ohio, you might bring a somewhat different perspective to this. I have to note, by the way, that Lafcadio O'Hearn spent his first 8 years in the United States in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Hearn did more than any foreigner to bring Japanese folklore to Western audiences. So as somebody coming initially from America, I'm just wondering what perspective you bring to these issues of Irish and Japanese folklore.
Sure. Well, to be honest, I didn't know too much prior to this project. And my mom's side of the family has Irish roots, and we've always talked about going to Ireland. I've yet to been. And this was supposed to be our year that we made the family trip. So in a way, doing this project allowed me to visit Ireland through the experience and through meeting Ray here in Tokyo, who I had not known previously after 10 years living here as well. And so there was a lot of serendipity. By starting this project, I was able to connect with people who, I had intended to put a little more effort into finding out my own past and my own history through my family and everything. We had kind of talked about this over the years, and this was supposed to be the year we all did that. So yeah, I, to be honest, didn't have really hardly any knowledge of the folklore and even the music. When I first heard a lot of the music Ray was presenting for the piece, I honestly didn't know how it was going to fit in. But I let him, guide Akira through the process. And as it started to come together and I started, getting the clips sent to me to preview bit by bit, I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. And then, I gotta also give credit to our editor, Naoko Masuda, who did a phenomenal job of piecing it all together. Again, remotely, we were not ever sitting in the same room and editing together or anything. So it was a lot of sharing things remotely and getting input. So I was learning as they were filming with Yoko and Akira. They would send me bits and I would get to learn things. Of course, her book that Akira got to read, he learned a lot as well. And so, I learned vicariously through the process. And I do look forward to whenever I do get to visit Ireland someday, but I definitely feel that I've already been there through the process.
Well, that's great, and we look forward to welcoming you to Ireland. But I spent 5 years in North America between New York and Canada, and so as well as at our embassy in London. So I'm very aware of what we call the diaspora. These are Irish people abroad, or people who feel a relationship to Ireland abroad. And we hear rumours that indeed traditional Irish music may be involved in the forthcoming presidential inauguration next in January. Let's see how that works out. One issue that Akira, the filmmaker, picked up on was how close the supernatural world is in these folk tales. Yoko said that reality and the surreal world coexist within themselves. And that's something that has always struck me in terms of Irish folklore and also Japanese. I think it's something that unites them very, very closely. If you look at the ghost stories of Lochcaddy Hearn, for example, the thing I think that strikes you most is the way that the supernatural and the natural world coexist and interact with each other. And that's something, particularly if you grew up in Ireland of the 1950s, as I did, that awareness of the coexistence of these two worlds was much, much more vivid then than it is today. So I wonder if that struck a chord with either of you. Raymond, you're a much younger man. Does it resonate with you?
It's just my birthday the other day. I don't feel time's ticking on. Yes. I mean, especially directly again with the same phrase about the driver looking out the window, wondering what Ireland's all about, essentially. And for the last 6 years or so, I've been going back to learn Irish, and then each time I go, I keep on going to Donegal for it. And I spent a year from leading up until the October of last year, and I spent a year in Gweedore and Falcara and in the way northwest, and I made a few friends there, and they would take me out now and again, and we'd just go driving through the hills and things like this, and every so often they'd stop and say, "Here, you want to have a look at this?" And it was a holy well, or it was like they just lifted up, they just pushed this kind of wild grass that had sort of grown over some areas, and took away this plank of wood that had just been put, not like, oh, we have to put a hinge on it and we have to make it look and lock it and all the rest of it, but just that old way of like, okay, there's a plank of wood on the top, that's it, protected. Lifted it up, we drank from it, and it was the purest water. And then all the stories that she was telling me about the local area, I was just, and I'm brought up in Belfast, so with constantly going to South County Down, that's where my father's side of the family comes from. So that's less a thing in the east, towards the east of the island, but it's still so pronounced in the west of the country. And I just loved that kind of, we're not going to go to the cinema, we're not going to go to the supermarket, we're going to go to a hill that to anybody else may seem just super random, really out there, and make sure that the holy well is respected. This kind of living with something spiritual and enjoying it for that merit is, I think, alongside my time here in Japan, is I've been kind of really thirsty and hungry for that. That sense of an unofficial but very well looked after, or very well kind of adhered to spiritual understanding. So I definitely agree and appreciate what you're saying, but I don't have the wherewithal. Actually, I've never been taught the specifics of a lot of it, and so I just find it's something that I'm doing more and more of recently, and obviously getting to know Yoko and like her book that was mentioned is full of that kind of stuff. Albeit I have to make sure my Japanese is up to speed to read my own culture. you know, that's a bit weird. But anyway, yeah. So I totally appreciate what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of interesting what you've been saying about finding these things out for yourself, because that was also very much my experience growing up. For example, when I was at school, we were never taught anything about early Irish art. I really didn't know we had it until my wife was involved in designing the catalogue for an exhibition of early Irish art in Dublin at a time when we were doing a magazine together for the Department of Foreign Affairs. And I mean, that was an absolute eye-opener to me. You know, I had a degree in history, but frankly, I knew nothing about that. Similarly, I suppose with the Irish language, you know, that's clearly part of your ongoing discovery of your Irish culture. And it's interesting because my father, who's a teacher, was very passionate about the Irish language. He spoke every dialect there was, and he could hold his own in Irish with pretty much anyone. But he was also conflicted because as a teacher, he saw that would it be more useful to be learning, you know, one or two modern European languages rather than a language which had a tremendous, you know, cultural history stretching back hundreds, thousands of years, but didn't perhaps have an awful lot of practical application.
Yeah, but the more it would be spoken, it would definitely have practical application. It would be my kind of would be my understanding of it. I mean, I have started to, you know, be very put a lot of time into the whole learning of Irish from Japan, really, because I did 1 year of it in school and moved away from it. And then it was only ultimately over here that I was like, well, I'd like to really put this, not put it to bed, but, you know, certainly tackle what I felt was a massive chasm of not knowing who I was. So this is what I think. See, I think there's a spectrum between meaningful significance and expediency. So people think, oh, it's not practical. How can I get a job with that? Or how do I earn with that? I mean, the same issues with English language. People are now in the same situation now as how do I get a job with that? How do I pay for that? How do I And they speak English and they don't know themselves though as a result. So they're worse off. And I mean, that's getting into that argument, you know, full keel. But I think other cultures know who they are. You see them on a plane, for example. If you're in Japan, you're doing a lot of international flights, and you see people who live over here, and they're Germans and they're Swiss or whatever, and they may be married to a Japanese lady, and they maybe speak Japanese to the wife, speak their home language, their own native language to the child, and then they'll speak English in an international setting. So, you know, it's like almost like code switching, you know, to go from one situation to the other, what's appropriate, but none of the meaning is lost. Whereas my conjecture is that we've lost a lot of our meaning about who we are, and so we're willing to go with any ship, you know. That's the danger. But that's getting really into that discussion. Rather, yeah. I mean, there's lots to be said about it, and it's a constant, ongoing discussion, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's hard to disagree with that. And funnily enough, an English friend recently asked me during the lockdown to recommend various books on Irish history, which I've done. And he came back to say, you know, but how come you as an independent country, you've basically lost your language? And how come people like the Welsh have actually revived their language in the last sort of 120 years or so?
They're indeed, inside the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we achieved independence, they didn't. But anyway, that's a whole different argument. So maybe, Jessop, I should bring you in at this point and get your perspective on things.
No, yeah, I was gonna piggyback off of what Ray said, that he's learning Irish here in Japan. I think that one thing that travel to other countries does for us, not only does it, you know, enlighten you to the country that you're visiting, but it actually makes you reflect back on where you're from much more. And so I know that, you know, through my time living abroad here in Japan, other parts of Asia, that I have actually dug deeper, I guess, back into, you know, where I'm from in Ohio, of course, but even further, like I had mentioned, my Irish roots, my dad's side is Polish. And the fact that I've never visited either is now eating away at me. So to know more about that, I think that's the benefit of traveling to other countries. You actually appreciate things and want to discover more about where you're actually from when you return, or if you're away from it. So it's not just about seeing the beautiful scenery or experiencing the place that you do visit, but it actually brings out the best in where you're actually from too.
Thank you. Okay, well, perhaps we should move on now to Akira's film Run. In Irish, I think we'd call that Ran, R-A-N-N. I'd be more inclined to pronounce it Ran, which I think in Irish is a verse or stanza of a poem with repetition being used as a literary tool. Now, I think Akira provides a stunning visual embroidery of this concept, merging scenery, music, and various other elements into a kaleidoscopic tapestry that enthralls and challenges. Now, I wonder if both of you would like to comment initially on how this was achieved technically. So, yep. Raymond,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm wondering the technical aspect. I mean, perhaps Jessop, if you want to kick off, because this is where you brought in, you managed to get the connection first, right? And then I basically had to think with those constraints how to
Sure.
build this with using Akira.
Sure. Well, I can't get too deep into how he technically pulled it off, but basically
Sure.
how we started was Alistair McBroom had provided us with drone footage that he had taken there in Ireland, and so the footage was of high quality. Akira had mentioned that he does a lot of his work with stock footage, usually short, 5-10 second little clips. So for us to produce something of almost 10 minutes that he did was quite an undertaking. So it took a lot of time of him going through the footage and then figuring out what areas he wanted to use. And then he pretty much every scene merges 2 or 3 different scenes in it. So he had to find meaning behind those scenes, as he had mentioned in the film. He didn't want to just visually slap layers on top of each other without any meaning. So I think that was the importance of Yoko's session, was putting some meaning behind why he was merging things together. And I do know that he uses, in terms of technical, he's using Photoshop, and he's using Sony products and all of that, if that's what you're getting at. But yeah, and then of course with Ray's guidance from there, the story kind of unfolded.
Yeah,
So
Raymond, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I was struck by what could be achieved with the use of stock video, and then the layering and the kind of creation of complexity. But go ahead, please. Give us your comments.
Yeah, the stock footage essentially was where Jessop picked up, because he was doing that on-running daily project that he had, and he had made that connection with Akira. I think, was it before
Instagram.
even I came on board? And but I had to wear this kind of creative hat that was dealing with him in terms of making a visual story. And then I also had this other creative hat where I had to consider, okay, if this is going to be a pilot show for multiple different expressions, like we were looking at getting other artists through the course of time to do to work with the likes of people like Alistair, who had already their own footage, and constantly looking to do this patchwork kind of, what can you do with these, it was kind of like a TV challenge program kind of thing, that here's the stock footage, what are you going to do with it, and by the way, you have to describe this culture or this country without actually having going there. And what we're going to do is drop in hints and specialists, and in this case folklorists, historians and the like, about the country and the challenges for you to do that. So that was kind of a loose framework behind the whole thing. And then but we definitely let Akira do his thing with the raw assets that we gave him. So and of course we got in Dr. Brian Lacey as well. He's pretty much Ireland's authority on St. Columcille. So he's a lovely gentleman. I have a lot of time for him, and he gave us some of his time to contribute as well. And we had this kind of sharing session, as you saw in the video. And then, but definitely Yoko's one, obviously native Japanese, and she's a lovely woman as well. Just her whole delivery is charming. And that really just allowed him to get a feel for the land without actually being there, and piece together in his own way the flow. And then the music came on a little. We didn't get the music on until a little bit later, and you know, I wanted to get something. I had. You'll notice that there's kind of three sections to the music, and the first one is the violin, the fiddle work, and that's from a group called North. And I had met them actually. They played in an event that I went to in Donegal one of the times a few years ago, and then we had Seamus, the spoken word artist, and then of course Imlay. That was a new single for them actually that they put out, and so at the end it all just came together, and it just was like, once the music hit, and Jessop often reminds me of, once that music hit, he was just like, okay, right, I know where I am now. Yeah, the whole thing sort of just, it was like the bow at the end, you know.
Yeah. Great. Well, look, thank you very much. Now we're coming, I think, to what would be the end of our time, but subject to what Kate may have to say, we might have an extra few minutes, and I thought then we could maybe broaden the discussion out a bit to look at our Japanese experiences and travel. I mean, carrying on from Ron, that seems to me to suggest the surreal experience of immersion in a different culture. The importance of travel has been stressed at various points, both in the film and by all of us here this evening. So I was going to ask both of you, are there kind of key episodes or epiphanies in your Japanese experiences that you'd highlight? Jessop, do you want to take that one?
Well, I've mostly lived in Tokyo while I've been here for 10 years, but I did spend some time out on Sado Island, which is in the Sea of Japan, between Japan and Korea. While I was living there, it's a very remote island. It actually, as I watched the film, it very much reminded me of it, as well as Ray had said, you know, the random hill that has a story behind it, or the creek that is worshipped and things like that. And so, you know, I think as people do come to, if they come to Japan as well to visit, you know, don't only come to Tokyo and Kyoto, but try to get into the countryside, and you can hear some amazing stories, a lot of folklore and tales from people, some that may seem crazy, but you do actually realize that a lot of this is true, and they believe it, and it has a lot of value. So I've appreciated those stories, and this year there's been a lot more domestic travel. So getting to those places off the beaten path is something I've made a point to do this year while I've been here.
It sounds like a kind of latter-day Lafcadio O'Hearn experience. He did exactly this, traveling around, listening to people, picking up on the folklore and so on. Raymond, you said, I think, being a foreigner in Japan made you think about your own culture. And that was very much my experience when I went to Japan in the 70s. But would you like to explain to us, you know, what that meant specifically for you?
Sure. I suppose it connects to your previous question about an epiphany moment. When they have maybe some of your viewers might know this, but there's a program called the JET Exchange program, Japan Exchange Teaching, or yeah, I think that's it. And basically that was my ticket into Japan to begin with, and I taught here for 3 years in the south of the country on Kyushu, in a prefecture called Miyazaki. And when I was teaching there, that was my first time living abroad, in my late 20s. And but I was very, very hungry, first of all, for another language, and was keen. I'd always been interested in Japan anyway, just its kind of coming from Ireland, you know, there isn't that strong link that you maybe have with the rest of Europe and America and the likes. But I wanted to do my own little kind of adventure, let's say. And so I was in the countryside, and when I was learning the language, which is a massive eye-opening effort anyway, you know, to have I mean, I would call Japanese a second language for me, because it was the first one that I got to any stage of fluency with. So those kind of connections where a word is spoken in a certain context relating to a certain thing, whether it's music, behavior, landscape, or whatever, and you all of a sudden all of those connections make sense about what a language is doing and what it's reflecting in the landscape or your surroundings and behavior then. And then I realized I had this kind of moment where I was emailing my brother, and he's a translator actually in Irish, and it just sort of hit me how much I was totally disconnected to the culture of Ireland. And so, like, I might call myself Irish, but really there was just so much detachment I felt at that moment. And that was down to essentially travel, learning a new language, having the interest and the manners almost to go in and you know, learn somebody else's culture. They give you the opportunity to be there. You know, the least you can do is really give them that feedback back, and it did so much for me on a personal level. So that was my kind of awakening. Whether it was rude or not, I don't know, but it was certainly a moment.
And so I guess this is what you mean when you say that you've been revising your own identity in the 16 years that you've been in Japan. Yeah,
pretty much all that time. Yeah.
Jessop, you have an even more complex tapestry of identity, I suppose, than the rest of us. You're interfacing the USA, Japan, Ireland. How does that feel?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and then, you know, I talk about my children that are, you know, half Japanese American, but I also remind them that they have Irish and Polish roots as well. So I hope to you know, pass the knowledge on to them, that they can experience all these countries as well.
We have a Polish connection within the family. My wife's sister-in-law was Polish, so we have that connection too. But I think we're probably coming to the end of our time now, and I guess to go back to the beginning again and to sort of finish on this note. This project has arisen out of the constraints of COVID-19, but it is an incredibly, I think, exciting project. Do you think that there are lessons we might learn from this about cultural interaction that we might continue post-COVID-19? Raymond? Sorry, Jessop, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Ahead, I mean, I certainly hope so. And I think that Ray and I agreed that whoever watches this production when it was put out in June, it wouldn't just be a blip on the radar and they would see something nice and forget about it when they turn the next page and see another beautiful destination. And I think that we did that. A lot of people said they watched the film 2 or 3 times, and that even if they aren't able to visit Ireland this year or next, they will probably still remember this years from now, and it will give them a reason to visit there. So I hope that these kind of, and it was also a two-way street. It wasn't all about Ireland. The fact that we had Japanese people working on this, I think, and producing something of Ireland made by Japanese, that was really cool. And as Ray had said, I hope that we can do this with other countries maybe down the line.
Yeah. It's interesting. The very first thing I did as a young diplomat in Japan was to present certificates for proficiency in the Irish language to a surprising number of Japanese who were learning Irish at that time. Wow. We'll sort of put the same question to you, Raymond.
So, yeah, I mean, that was done. You can tell there's a different tone to the video from the, you know, at the beginning. It's like, oh, we've just gone into lockdown, and you know, there's the whole beginning kind of feel to it. We're obviously now in the middle of November, and everybody's gone through their own domestic stories, you know, across the world. It's developed into its own thing. So You know, I don't know. I think on a domestic level, though, I mean, if I was in Ireland, and indeed the Irish, I think, government, along with Tourism Ireland, maybe did a promotion to get out and see the local areas, because they can't go international, or they don't have that option as much. And so I saw that coming straight away. And, you know, more power to that stuff. You know, everybody runs away from their country as soon as they get an opportunity. Whereas I'm rushing to get back, like, whenever I can. And I think Japan is doing that as well. They have a campaign at the minute, Go To Travel campaign, which is a discounted means to get around the country and see things. So I'd like to see more of this kind of introspection. You know, I think people do react to a little bit of external affirmation, you know, seeing their own country from another person's perspective. And, you know, that's definitely the case for Irish, and it's also the case for Japanese too. So more of that, I think, is you know, is well worth it. But like, I mean, and also, like, we haven't stopped as well. I mean, Jessop's got his podcast, which is a place to travel. And then I've just launched the website this morning called crutagaelach.com, which is, and I'll put that in the stuff in the for later on to put up on the notice board or whatever, which is a kind of merger of Irish and Japanese. I'm talking about Irish stuff, and I'm using Japanese skills, craftsmanship, to make clothing that's about Irish symbology. So so things are moving forward. Things are always going on, you know. It's whether we get it out there and get that message out there for people to enjoy.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention the importance of local travel. I remember when we came back from a long posting in London in 1997, I said to my wife, you know, let's behave like tourists and let's go and see a lot of the obvious things that you tend not to see in your own country. And, you know, we went and visited places like Newgrange, the megalithic tombs we have in Ireland that are older than the Egyptian pyramids. And we did that for 2 years until I was posted to Korea. And it really stood me in good stead for the rest of my career. So there's a certain number, you know, I do agree with you about the local travel. I suppose the final question I would just put, because I think we're more or less out of time, is the importance of travel to who we are and what we can become, I suppose, has been emphasized. Do you think that it'll be different when it returns post-COVID, or will we just slot back into the way we were before?
I think it's going to be fundamentally changed, both from the industry and I think from travelers' perspective. I mean, I think there's just going to be a lot of psychological barriers to overcome as well for people to travel. But I do also think that people are going to appreciate it much more. You know, for better or for worse, we had unlimited freedom to basically travel the globe as we please, pretty much all countries. And so that was great, but over tourism was becoming a big issue that was being discussed in the industry, and how are we going to curb this? So hopefully in a way this, you know, this mitigates that, but it also gives people a greater appreciation when they do get to travel.
Interesting, an Italian diplomat once said to me, he'd never forgive what Ryanair had done to Venice. Raymond, would you like to have a last word on this?
I wonder what I'd love to know what was going on there to Venice. Oh, I suppose just loads of Irish people, or just
loads of people from, you know, Ryanair serves a lot of places other than Ireland.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, who knows where it's going to go. I hope there's some form of normality, but then there's massive debts that have to be paid. So does the economy support, you know, a pre-COVID existence again? Who knows? But I think, let's say it does, even if people are go back, I think there's going to be maybe about a year of absolute discovery of things, and then it'll come back to some sort of normality again. People are very quick to forget the kind of torment or the hardship that they go through and hit another normal trend, you know.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think we're probably out of time at this stage. So listen, I'll say thank you to Raymond and Jessop for a most entertaining conversation. And I think at this stage, I'll hand back to Kate. Thank you very much.
Okay,
thanks very much, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you all three. And we are actually going to final close out with another short film clip that Jessop will be introducing for us. But before we do that, as always, a special thank you to Tom McIntyre and his crew and NYU DC Dialogues. And join us in December. We're going to mix it up a little bit. December 16th, we're going to show a 90-minute film. Your teasers are Cousins Who Never Met One Another, Surfing, and Blasket Islands. You will get the link for that when the registration goes out. It will not be a live event. It'll just be a viewing of the film. And as always, check out our various book clubs. We have nonfiction November 23rd, fiction December 14th, and poetry December 21st. And for more contemporary Irish art, you can always visit our website. And if you're not on our mailing list, you can also get on our mailing list by visiting our website. So Jessop, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we're going to close out with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so the final clip here is a message from the current ambassador of Ireland to Japan, Mr. Paul Kavanagh. He was gracious enough to give us a closing video for our debut of this production back in June here in Japan. So we'd like to thank Mr. Kavanagh and the Ireland Embassy in Japan for providing us support of our project. So this is a message from Mr. Kavanagh back in June.
Díomh go léirigí nóisle is Misha Paul Kavanagh, ambassador na hÉireann sa Japan. Mina sama hajime mashta. Trúnichi Ayradandu Taishi, Paul Kavanagh des. Good evening and congratulations to all of the team involved in this wonderful production. Explore, dream, and discover together Ireland and Japan. I really enjoyed Run, the collaborative video art piece by Akira Meenan-Waugh, which is based on the work of Alistair McBroom in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. It is a stunning and innovative representation of our country and its landscape. The team connected everything beautifully, using both traditional and modern Irish music, our ancient language, and our rich folklore. A warm word of thanks to everyone involved, both here in Japan and in Ireland. Thank you for the panelists this evening, including renowned Professor Yoko Watanabe. Thanks also to Sarah Hickey of the Ireland-Japan Chamber of Commerce and to Jessop Petroski of CWW Travel and his partners, whose shared vision have made this event possible. This is a very fine example of collaboration across continents, working together with the goal of bringing hope in this troubled time of COVID-19. Furthermore, as a director of the charity Support Our Kids, I would like to express on their behalf also our appreciation for your generosity. COVID-19 has radically changed the travel environment worldwide, but travel and tourism will always be an important part of our lives, and it will certainly continue to bring Japanese and Irish people closer together in the years to come. Of this, I'm convinced. Ladies and gentlemen, Ireland's tourism authority, Tourism Ireland, and its partners are in the process of planning for the recovery of the tourism from overseas into Ireland. And they have launched a new campaign called Fill Your Heart with Ireland. The campaign sets out to remind people about what Ireland has to offer, including our peaceful green vistas, clean air, historic towns and castles, and friendly people, just to name a few things. Tonight's event succeeds in filling people's heart with a sense of wonder and at the magical scenery to be found on our beautiful island. We all look forward to the day when normal travel can resume, and I hope that this story of friendship and cultural collaboration of this evening will continue. And I hope also that everyone watching this will have the opportunity to visit Ireland sometime in the future, in the near future. Garab mila mahaguif. Arigatou gozaimasu.
And let me just say that we will be posting a recording of the panel talk on our website, as well as links to both Ray and Jessop's websites that they mentioned and their future work and their continuing projects. So I want to thank again Ray, Jessop, Paul for taking time, being in very different time zones, and for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.